Welcome to The Shield Within. The issues discussed on the Shield Within podcast do not reflect the opinions of any specific agency. They are the views of the host and the guest. Any persons discussed may be fictional for comedic purposes only. This podcast is rated explicit and listener discretion is advised. Listening to The Shield Within may trigger repressed or suppressed memories or experiences. Please contact a mental health professional at your earliest convenience. It's time for the chaos to cease.
Time to open yourself to peace.
From the hours you've put in.
To the next shift you begin.
From the endless pursuit of release.
That finds the worst unleashed.
Transform the ugly into a win.
Get to know your shield within.
We'll refer that to Mr. Hat. Welcome to the Shield Within.
Welcome.
We have with us today. Well, I'm pretty excited. I'm super excited. That's always my buzz line is, hey, I'm super excited. Donnie's like, stop using that. But I'm really excited today because we have Erika and Shannon from the Windmill Wellness Ranch out of the great state of Texas, right? Amen. We actually have quite a following out there in Texas.
Awesome.
So welcome, officers. So let's do a little bit of business. So if you're a Facebooker, and since our demographics say that we're all old as shit, so we know you are, go to Facebook / The Shield Within. Or if you want to come to our website and see our smiling face and worship at the Hedgehog Donnie icon we have there, go to www.theshieldwithin.com. If you're in need of services, boy, you've dialed into the right podcast today. Because not only do we have Dr. David, but we have our distinguished guests.
That's right.
Where you can reach out. But if not, if you want to talk to Dr. David, you can go to lessonslearnedcoaching.com or on our website, just punch that coaching button. So who we have also is Mr. Hat and Mrs. Hat are sitting at the table. Mrs. Hat, I think, is just taking a back seat. She's just chilling out in the studio today. But Mr. Hat.
Hello. Hello.
Let me turn the camera so you can see. There's Jeff.
Come on, hello, everybody. Have a face for radio. Don't forget that.
That's right. Jeff's a retired sergeant from our state.
That's right.
Ohio State Highway
That's
Patrol.
right. A little over a year and a half.
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. We're out. We used to have Sergeant Sundays, didn't we?
Right.
Yeah, Jeff and I worked really well together.
Killed a lot of hours just sitting there doing nothing.
Yeah, man.
But talking.
No, I'm kidding. All right, enough of my mindless banter, David. Go ahead and roll.
Well, again, welcome Erika, welcome Shannon, and welcome Windmill Wellness Ranch in Texas. We know y'all are several states away, but in spending time on your website, Shannon, I found that there's a wide range of online and virtual treatment offerings, and I'd like to get into that at some point during our time together, because even though we're in Ohio, I think folks listening can access. And like Marc said, we got a group of folks listening in Texas, and I think having them know about your facility would be awesome too. So for those who are listening to us right now, I'm going to key a lot of my questions to Erika from the podcast she did on Spinning Our Gears with Turk and Swagger. And you brought up a lot of stuff that we emphasize strongly here in our podcast. So I thought I'd start with a couple of those. First of all, you brought up in the podcast how difficult your childhood was. And we have found that to be very common with the officers that are having the greatest struggle dealing with the traumatic reality of their jobs, that the early childhood stuff is it just sets you up to make life really hard for a law enforcement or fireman or paramedic. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what happened to you in your childhood, if you're comfortable. And if not, I have a big question about, you are a therapist now, my dear, and I want everybody to understand Erika is a master's level social worker. And LCSW working on getting, full certification and everything, man. And so you've got a background that is rich in experience. So as a little kid, with all that was happening, that you can or cannot share, doesn't matter, did you see a therapist?
Yeah, so I'm very open with my story.
Cool.
I grew up with physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. My mother was and still is violently mentally ill.
Okay.
So that had a huge impact on, of course, how I was growing up. I spent more time with her than I did the father or the stepfather. So she was really my primary caretaker. She had her own issues that she never received help for. And of course, this tends to be generational. And so they were passed on to me. The question was, had I ever had therapy before? I did have a suicide attempt when I was 14.
14.
And my mother reached out to my school counselor, who also had a private practice. And so I went to see him for about 6 months. Knowing what I know now, it was a complete waste of time. I did, however, learn how to play chess. So there's that. But as far as, talking about what I was really struggling with, giving me the tools that I needed, giving me the safe environment to be able to process what I was experiencing at home really wasn't there.
It just wasn't there. Yeah. And did you end up like in foster care?
No.
Okay.
There was never any type of. You have to remember, I'm 53 years old, so this was back at the time where pretty much the home stayed in the home.
Yeah.
There was one incident where I had showed up to school with some pretty significant bruises.
Okay.
That resulted in me being called into, of course, that same counselor's office. They asked me about it. I told them that my mom hit me, and I never heard anything more about it. So CPS was never involved. Legal was never involved. My primary sexual abuser fled the country, so he was never brought to justice.
Wow.
So,
wow. And then all of that happened, and by the time you were 14, you were thinking about ending your life.
Yeah, and so not coincidentally, at the age of 15, I had run across somebody in school. It was a schoolmate that was a police explorer for one of the local police departments, and that really piqued my interest. Of course, what I've discovered since then is a lot of us end up in these first responder and veteran track professions because we have our own trauma, which creates a deeper empathy for the pain of other people.
Yes.
And so we may not have been able to get help for our own stuff initially, but we want to make sure that help is available for others that are going through it. So there are some benefits, definitely benefits to experiencing more trauma in law enforcement, because that's what eventually got me into therapy at the level that I needed. So, what we don't factor into the equation oftentimes is we view, whether it's law enforcement or being a firefighter or whatever that case may be, EMT, paramedic, dispatches, we want to feel like we're contributing in a positive way.
Absolutely.
Of course, to our countries, to our country, to our communities. And so that was really attractive. There's also a psychological component, right? When you grow up in an environment where there's a lot of chaos and you don't really have much of a voice, we oftentimes are attracted into professions that provide us with that voice.
Right.
And so what I didn't factor into the equation was the exposure to additional trauma.
Yeah. Yes.
That never crossed my mind when I made the decision to go into law enforcement. But, I started out as a police explorer. I absolutely fell in love with it. I think we had to memorize something like 2010 codes. I memorized all 100. I spent all of my extra time. And so, like a lot of us, I thought, well, I'll just take a class, one criminal justice class when I finish high school and see. And that was it. I did, and I was hooked.
Wow. And so
there's the rest of it.
And when time you get to 14 and your schoolmates has this experience that sounds really interesting to you, up to that point, you hadn't thought about becoming a law enforcement person. True?
Well, between the ages of 14 and 15.
Okay. Yeah.
That's really when the thought started coming into my head. And then the more I learned about it, and the more I was around it, the more I fell in love with it.
Gotcha.
So, I was in law enforcement for 15 years. 8 out of those years, I specialized in juvenile crimes. So not just juvenile suspects, but all of the cases. I think at one time I had 132 open active felony cases sitting on my desk.
Good Lord.
All of the child abuse cases came to me. So even though I was never able to get justice for my abuse, I was able to turn that into the ability to get justice for other kiddos.
I love that.
And that was healing.
Yes. You're serving in a very real and concrete way. Where did you get your training? Like, did you have a police academy that you attended then? Where was that?
Yeah. So it's kind of a funny story. Like I said, I was with the Police Explorers for a few years, rode around with the officers. At 18 years old, I got my foot in the door. I applied for a jailer position at the Bell County Jail in Belton, Texas, and they hired me.
Okay.
And so I got more experience there. But then while I was there, I had a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Leon Charpentier, that was the director of emergency medical services for the city in which I not only was a police explorer, but also ended up serving. And he had a nighttime police academy. So I'm pretty broke. I'm a jailer back in 89.
Okay.
Didn't get paid a lot. I was also, by that time, was a single parent. So I sold plasma.
Oh my, yes.
To
yes.
pay for my police academy. So I would work all day, and then I would go to the academy at night.
Wow.
And back then, that department was still so small that they weren't sponsoring people through the academy. So they were only hiring people that were already licensed.
Okay.
Yeah, that was kind of the same thing here in Ohio. Was that, well, like with me, I paid for my own academy when I went through.
Yeah.
Which is 91, 92.
I don't regret it.
Yeah. No, me neither.
Do you look back on your training and do you find that it was adequate?
Yes and no. I think the bulk of experience and learning comes through not just our own experience, but also through field training.
Okay.
I learned the basics, right? The traffic code, penal code, family code, all that good kind of stuff, how to conduct a traffic stop, how to handcuff someone. But the bulk of my training really didn't prepare me. Okay. And it certainly didn't prepare me for that first call out of field training that resulted in an officer-involved shooting. It was a suicide by cop. So I've never been around death like that before. Yeah. And I was just like every other rookie. They hand you the keys and tell you that you're clear from field training. And I'm thinking, hell yeah, man, I'm going to go out and I'm going to write tickets, get into foot pursuits and car pursuits, and I'm going to get to play with the lights and sirens. And my first call, literally as I was loading my unit, was an unknown disturbance. And that's what that call turned into, was a suicide by cop. So no, there was nothing that could have prepared me for that.
Erika, did you end up shooting in that event, or was it another officer?
Yes.
Okay.
Wow. Any training involve the words mental health? Yeah.
Everybody starts laughing at that one.
That was a liberal back in those days, that you just didn't do that. I came from the old guard. You work hard, you play hard, you don't bitch about your problems, you keep your shit tight. After that shooting, the first time, this is again back when females really still weren't very common in law enforcement, and certainly not one that was 115 pounds, 5'4" 3/4. So I really had to go in there and earn that respect and earn that medal to be able to show them that I had what it took. Yeah. But, after the shooting, I remember my chief, who he ended up getting fired, and that's probably a story for another day, but I had a hand in that, and I'm not ashamed of it. Mm-hmm. But he absolutely did not want women in that police department. He actually had friends that were field training officers, because of course I had been a police explorer, and I had 2 of them come up to me and say, "Watch your shit, don't fuck up. The chief is out to get you. He doesn't want you here."
Damn.
And so Yeah.
Wow.
There just weren't a lot of me around back then. But the first time that individual ever said anything at all that was kind or respectful or even acknowledging me as one of his officers was after that shooting. He came up and he slapped me on the back. He was a big guy, slapped me on the back and said, "Good job, buddy."
Yeah.
And it came across as just, I thought, you're full of shit.
Yeah.
You haven't said anything nice to me this entire time. You've never even really acknowledged my presence other than to try to get me out of your PD. And so because of the shooting, of course, I was, still today, I got my 6 weeks of leave and was required to see a psychologist, which oddly enough was based out of San Antonio. And I was from the Central Texas area. So I lied. I lied the whole time. They ask you those questions. They're trying to determine, right, if you're fit to return to duty. And, are you having nightmares? No.
Nope.
Are you
Sleep like a baby.
thoughts? Absolutely not. Are you losing your shit for no reason at all? No, absolutely not. You start crying for no reason? No, absolutely not. How are you managing this? I was trained and I'm managing it well. All bullshit. But I had worked so hard to get into the career field, and I wanted it so badly that I wasn't willing to let an event that was outside of my control end that. Now, of course, it ended up happening 15 years later, but not at that moment.
Right. You were too early. It was too early in the game.
Yeah.
You also said something in the Spinning Our Gears podcast that fits in here well to me, that you were addicted to adrenaline long before you were addicted to alcohol. And
Absolutely.
I'm thinking, that had to be part of the appeal of law enforcement work, right? Was the possibility of adrenaline. Wow. Excitement.
It was like a huge shot. It was great, and I was getting paid for it.
Yeah. Awesome. And then you walk into the job, and this happens. First call. And you go, you do what you're trained to do. And at the end of that whole event, if I'm understanding this right, please correct me if I'm wrong, but at the end of that whole event, and you were involved in shooting, that you had to give your gun to the department and get basically sent away, is the way I thought of it. It was like they were deliberately, knowingly, intentionally isolating you at a time when it would appear to me that you needed a lot of support. They did the exact opposite of that and isolated you away from all your resources. Did I hear all that right?
That is absolutely correct. At that point, like I said, I was a single parent. I had a young child at home. He was really right on the cusp of still being a toddler. And that's the first thing that happened, of course, with, I understand it now. I didn't understand it back then. It was almost like I felt like I had done something wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Here you go. You worked so hard to get into this field. Oh, you shot someone. Well, we're going to make you stay at home for 6 weeks. You cannot come back to work. And by the way, we need your weapon because we need to turn it into the Texas Department of Public Safety for, evidence processing. And I'm thinking, evidence processing?
Yeah, what are you processing?
What have I done wrong? It was me, or it was going to be my partner. It was going to be this guy. So I really had no one to talk to. I had one session with the therapist that I mentioned. It wasn't like therapy was offered to me. It was, let's get her in for an hour, out if we can put her back out on the streets.
Exactly. They're checking boxes. There wasn't anything else going on there. And it just blows me away. That happened like as soon as you walked into the career. I mean, boom, right away you got this incredible incident you had to work in. Boom, you had to use your weapon.
Literally, there was a senior officer there at department, and I will never forget this. It was actually the same night that the shooting had happened. So I'm still at this is back in the day, handwritten report. So I'm, sucking down ungodly amounts of coffee and writing the report out and talking with, the detectives at the PD about what happened. And it was insane. Yeah. But as far as like offering therapy or, hey, we didn't even have crisis intervention teams at that time. So there was.
We need those for.
Right. And none of your coworkers came up to you and offered anything either? It wasn't just the chief.
Well,
the coworkers also.
I did have some coworkers that told me that I had done a good job, that I had done my job. One particular senior officer came up, like I was talking about when I was still at the PD. I hadn't left from that shift yet. And they brought it to me this way. What they said was, well, you got your cherry busted early, Erika, so you're either going to stay or you're going to quit. And I'm not a quitter.
Yeah.
I love a good challenge, and I think that really set with me. Like, I'm not quitting this. I worked too hard for it. I'm going to do whatever I need to do, check the boxes I need to check so I can get back to what I love doing.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, I know when Kelly was on in one of our cast members or whatever podcast members, she within her first 2 weeks on the job working there at my former agency, she had just back-to-back major traumas and had a dead body call. And when I was reflecting, as you were talking about with yours, is that you hadn't been around death, nonetheless being the shooting, that her FTO at the time was like, well, you can't handle this. And she's like, yeah, I can handle it. Just effing give me a minute. It's the first time I've ever been exposed to this.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like how, as you're telling the story in my mind, I'm thinking, good God, first call up.
Yeah. Boom.
And then the only thing they can say is like, oh, wow, hey, good job, and that's it. I mean, no one, I don't think anyone, even early in my career, even talked about, hey, are you doing all right? Because I can remember, like my first fatal vehicle accident, was a single car, kid lost control and bounced his head off a tree, and there was no blood. There's a huge open gash in the side of his head. And unfortunately, the victim was the brother of an officer from Piqua Police Department. Ooh. And we had to do death notification and all that. And I can remember that bothering me for like 3 days after that.
Oh, yeah.
That I was troubled with it. But go ahead, Erika.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, within relatively the same time frame, we had the Luby's massacre, and the Luby's massacre was in the city directly next to mine, so we all responded. And I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for that either. I wasn't prepared to see my childhood friend's mother in there as one of the deceased. The thing that I talk to clients about all the time, and it's something that I finally had to make peace with, because when other people question, you start to question yourself. Do I really have what it takes? How come other people are basically acting like this shouldn't fuck me up when it's fucking maybe
because they're faking it.
Right. What I've come to realize is, I don't care how much training you had, how many years you've been in, how great you are, how many bars and medals and commendations that you have. At the end of the day, there is one thing that no amount of training can do. It cannot train the human out of you.
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah, good. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay, you had a little kid at the point where you entered your career. I get the impression you were not married at the time?
No, I had one of those very common for people with traumatic childhood experiences. I had a marriage that got me out of and kept me out of my childhood home. It didn't last long. I was divorced by the time I was 21, but I had a very small child at home at the time. So, that was another struggle for me was, I really didn't want to work night shift. When you're a single parent, and you work night shift, you have two choices when you have young children. You either don't eat, or your child lives at the babysitter's. They're at the babysitter's while you're at work, and they're at the babysitter's while you sleep. So that was just one other stressor that nobody had really prepared me for. But again, this was back in the days when the chief was doing everything that he could to keep his department all male.
Right, exactly.
So there was certainly not any empathy for the fact that I had a small child at home, and no one ever voiced concern after that shooting that, all I had to go home to was a toddler. I was barely taking care of myself at that point. So my kids struggled as a result because I just wasn't there. I wasn't present mentally.
Right, exactly. It's almost like you were just a cog in a machine.
Brother, that's all any of us are.
You're not really a person. You're just, you fill out a duty roster in a nice fashion. there's just no regard for you, the person.
And I think that's a hard lesson for us to learn is, most of us that get into these career fields, we're passionate. We absolutely want to make a difference. And so for me to get into that field and then realize there was very little support for these things that we encounter on the job was disheartening. Now, eventually, like I said, that chief of police was politely asked to leave. And
why did they ask him to leave? Was he incompetent or just
because I had put in for a promotion to corporal, and he had already handpicked somebody. In fact, I had friends in the PD at that point. They learned to respect me and knew that I was there to, do a great job. And so I'd already been told that another individual had been hand selected by the chief.
Okay.
So when I turned in my letter of intent to my sergeant, he said absolutely not, because he was friends with the chief. So I said, well, that's fine. I'm going to take this to the lieutenant, as I meet the qualifications. There's nothing prohibiting me from boarding for this promotion. And so then I went to the captain, who was also a friend of the chief, and he told me the same thing. And then I went to the chief, and the chief told me that he threatened my job. He threatened my career, actually, not just my job. He essentially told me that he would make certain I never worked in law enforcement again if I didn't stand down. And, so at that point, I took it to the city manager. He was threatening to fire me at that point because I was refusing to rescind my letter of intent for promotion. And when I got to the city manager's office, one thing that I did do, because when I walked out of his office, I called TMPA. Thank you, TMPA.
There you go. Shout out.
Who gave me some great advice. He said, do you have any proof of any of this? And I said, no, I don't. He said, you said that you're supposed to meet with the chief on Monday. And I said, yeah. He said, record it. So I did. So when I went to the city manager's office, the city manager asked this question. Do you have any proof? And I said, yes, I do. And I pulled out one of those little tiny mini cassettes and I set it on his desk and he played it. And about a week later, my sergeant, who again was a friend of this chief, came and found me. I was in the patrol room and he laid a gold badge down on the desk that I was seated at. And I was a little confused. I think at first I was like, what, did I get corporal? I didn't board, right? I haven't done the process yet. And then I realized that the badge said chief. And he said, you got what you wanted. And I said, I didn't want that. I wasn't asking for him to be fired. I was simply asking to be allowed the same opportunity to promote as any other officer in this department. And my gender shouldn't have a part to play in that.
Well,
so needless to say, he was terminated, and I boarded and I smoked my competition. So I got that corporal's position, and then eventually I made sergeant and detective on top of that. So, yeah.
Very, very good.
See, a bunch of stripes sitting there at this table there, Mr. Hat, right?
That's right. You can have my stripes now.
At the point fairly early in your career, you ended up getting married. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, when you got married, he knew you were a police officer.
Oh, yeah.
And did that make him hesitate?
No, actually, he was kind of the male version of a badge bunny.
Oh.
Mrs. Hat?
He was married to a cop. So, he was a school teacher. He was clueless.
That's funny.
He was excited about being able to tell his friends that his wife was a cop, but he didn't understand the toll that line of work tends to take on family members.
Okay.
That he wasn't prepared for.
Yeah.
And neither was I. So that was 10 years. And actually, when the wheels came off for me, part of what was going on in that time frame was he filed for divorce. He couldn't handle me anymore. Yeah. I couldn't handle me. My trauma from childhood, from 15 years in law enforcement, was spilling out of my pores like a cancer.
Yeah.
And so it ate that relationship up.
Yeah.
But, he didn't file for divorce until after I was terminated from the police department. So there's always that question in the back of my mind, okay, well, I knew that he liked to be married to a cop, but he's doing well today. Produced some brothers and a sister from my youngest son, and he gave me my youngest son, so I appreciate him for that.
That's powerful. Along the way, Did you share much of your job with him?
I told him about the shooting. I didn't go into detail. I told him about the Luby's massacre. I didn't go into detail, and that kind of transpired throughout our relationship. I remember one very, very vivid memory. I was outside hosing my shoes off. I'm sure you guys can fill in the blanks on that one. He came out. He was frustrated. He's like, "What are you doing? Come in the house." And I said, "I need to finish what I'm doing first, and I'll be in a minute." He goes, "Well, just bring him inside." I said, "You don't want me to bring him inside right now, my brother?"
No.
So I didn't. He was a teacher. He didn't understand that world at all. And I didn't want to fuck him up.
So it created distance between the two of you.
Yeah.
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 Well, I got a question real quick, though.
Go.
Yeah.
Jeff, when's the first time you walked in the house naked after work?
Often, actually. But not, different.
No, I mean because your uniform was so nasty.
Fortunately, I don't think I always had to change of clothes at the office.
Oh, at the office, yeah.
But I've certainly taken my shoes off many a times for different reasons.
Cleats are great for traction, but they're really bad.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they are. And the first time I'd had a incident where I had a hoarder that had passed away, and this place was just the place nightmares are made of. So anyway, I come walking in the house, virtually butt-ass naked. My wife's like, "What the fuck, Mark?" I'm like, "I ain't bringing that shit in here, man. 91% isopropyl alcohol kills everything." This is what I learned after that. But anyway, sorry, didn't mean to hijack that. Just put it in my mind.
Did it have an effect on your parenting?
Absolutely.
What happened there?
So I kind of became the thing I swore I would never do. I was very overbearing. I was controlling. I ran my family like I ran my shift.
Ooh, okay.
And I realize now that
how'd that work out for you?
But, at the time, yeah, absolutely. But it also put me into overdrive as far as my desire to protect my children. My oldest son, for example, he wanted to go into the Boy Scouts and begged me for years. And I was working pedophile crimes. I refused. I'm like, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. So, I was very strict with them about what time they needed to be in. I wanted to know who they were with. And I'm not saying that's unhealthy, but I did it to a level of being unhealthy. So, yeah, it impacted my kids. Plus, I wasn't home very often. And when I was home.
Yes, exactly. Your body was there, but the rest of you was not present.
Yeah.
And so as you said in the podcast, you're at this point in your life, both your children are adults, obviously. And one of your children, the younger of the two, and you have a relationship that's very positive. The older of the two that was around a few years longer, he's having a hard time knowing how to relate to you at this point.
Yeah, he was the toddler that was around when I first started, and he's now 33 years old. We've had some conversations. In fact, I have some really good conversations. Him asking me, why I used to be the way that I was. He's told me how it affected him and the consequences in his life and his own mental health. Yeah. So without going into a lot of history, because it's really not germane to the conversation, my mother inserted herself into that relationship. She's done that before. Okay. And unfortunately, this time it was detrimental. My son reignited his anger. And so we haven't talked in over a year. So he's angry with me. And we've talked about it before, and he told me, he said, Mom, you were my hero. And I said, I know that. And, yes. He remembered at one point I was dressed up as McGruff the crime dog, and I went to his daycare. And everything was great until he heard my voice. Uh-oh. And he knew it was Mom. So he was telling the other kids, my mom is McGruff the crime dog. So, he understood. He grew up in that police department. He called the chief Mr. Mike. I didn't call the chief Mr. Mike. He would, plop into detectives' offices and grab that. He literally grew up in that building. And when I fell from grace, I fell hard. So when I started drinking alcoholically. I lost his respect, and he became scared.
Yeah. You were no longer the rock.
And unfortunately, it's not something that I can fix for him. I've suggested that he get some help professionally, but just like me, I had to be at a point where I was ready, and he's not ready yet. Gotcha. So I have to honor and respect that.
It reminds me very much of a lot of the children I worked with, first responders. One in particular whose dad was an EMT, had been for a long time. Mom and dad had gotten divorced. He remarried another EMT. And he got more, as longer his career went on, the more distant he became from her. And by the time she got to be like 15, 16, she had no idea who this guy was. I mean, she would go visit him, but it was meaningless contact. The guy was kind of there, mostly not, in terms of emotional and psychological presence. So going to visit him was empty, and it just didn't have any reward for her. So by the time she graduated from high school, they barely spoke. I haven't seen her since that time, so I don't know. Things do evolve. But it really does create a lot of distance in parenting, it seems, almost across the board.
It does. It absolutely does. I absolutely know it's not even a question that my job and my mindset while I was in that career definitely had a negative impact on not just my marriage, but on my husband.
Yes.
He didn't. He knew he was signing up to be married to a cop. He didn't know the baggage that came with that. And so, at Windmill, it's not just about treating the client. It's also about helping the family and providing them with an avenue of support. I'd actually like to kind of turn this over to Shannon, because Shannon has experience with being the spouse.
Right.
Oh, wow. What a great segue.
Yes, exactly.
You should be the host, Erika. You ever thought about doing a podcast?
Well, Shannon, time for you, my dear. First of all, I'm curious, this woman applied to your agency at some point, right?
She did.
And what was your reaction upon meeting Erika?
Oh, right away. She was hired right away. Okay. I mean, it's very hard to find. There are very few Erikas. To find a female first responder that's also a licensed clinical social worker there are very few of those across the country.
Yes.
So she brought a piece to Windmill that was needed.
Awesome.
I've always wanted to help the first responder community and the families of the first responders. Those are often overshadowed. There's a lot out there now for first responders, but a lot of people forget about what the spouses or the partners or the children, what their household is like. Coming up through that home. And so that is we see a lot of those types of clients come in because it is a different counseling set that is required for the children for the spouses of. Yeah. And then Erika leads the first responder groups, but it's a different specialty.
Yes. Yes, one that you need.
So, the reasons that we do that, of course, we want the families to be well, too. If we have somebody that comes into treatment, whether it's 30, 60, or 90 days or longer than that, and they reach a level of stability where we're able to say clinically you're stable enough to return home and to continue to work on your recovery, through self-help programs and outpatient therapy. I've worked in other places where the families really weren't taken in consideration. So if you can imagine taking somebody out of what is essentially an unhealthy home environment, because it's not just us, it affects our family and it affects our home life as overall.
Right.
And we take somebody and we help them heal, we help them process. They're able to work through their issues, and then they finish treatment and we drop them back in that same sick environment.
Yeah.
Not a good rep.
Yeah. Same thing used to happen with kids who would go into foster care. The families of origin would do absolutely nothing during the time the kid was in foster care. Mm-hmm. The kid would get lots of counseling. The foster family would do what it's supposed to do most of the time, and eventually the kid would be, okay, you're fine now. You can go back to your family of origin. Okay, I'm screwed. It's straight down from here, and so often the kids would know that. And no matter how good an aftercare program you put together, it was still real hard.
Yeah. So, we offer family workshops, and awesome. I want Shannon to talk about that, 'cause she's got a better bird's eye view of what that entails. But it's about helping family members understand how to support their family members or their loved ones in a healthy way, because a lot of family members don't know how to do that. Right. It's not anything wrong. Don't know, but it also provides an avenue of support for those family members. So, Shannon, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So first off, Windmill was built out of a need. It wasn't. It was built because research and science, everything had been there about what we needed to do to treat an individual, but yet the models that were out there did not support mental wellness. They're often substance abuse centers that were the 28, 30-day model. Yeah. Those were conceived out of, the 28-day model was conceived out of not losing pay and grade. So 28 days was set up as the norm. Mm-hmm. And so when we built Windmill, it was with the primary purpose of helping those people in our community. But then it branched out. One of the things that was always left out of the places that I ran was the family component. And one session or a workshop at the end of their visit after 30 days doesn't do it. No. That's not enough.
No. What? No. It doesn't?
No. So we have a family workshop and their own process groups every weekend. And
that's cool.
It's important. I didn't realize you guys were from Ohio. You guys have major deficits in your state for mental health and substance abuse.
Yeah, we're
and then the reason I know that is because I had a couple state senators from Ohio come and visit me about 5 months ago.
And do you have Sherrod Brown or? Damn it.
It was Terry Johnson and Frank.
Oh, yeah, state senator. Okay. I was thinking.
Came out along with a whole other group because they said, we really want the Windmill model. You guys have the best outcomes in the nation. They came out 5 years ago and then kind of tried to do it themselves, realized they weren't making the mark, came back 5 months ago, and they can't really get everybody wants a quick fix, a Band-Aid.
Well, of course.
And you can't put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Okay. You just can't do it. And so that's what they really just don't have enough people in power in the state of Ohio to say, this is the way it needs to be. And you can't cut this up into pieces.
Yes. Right.
So it was really unfortunate. In fact, I got a first responder out of a VA clinic there in Ohio. It took me 7 days to get him out of there. But once I got him to me, my God, is he doing well?
Dave sounds like we need to do a road trip.
Yeah.
Let's go and hang out for the weekend, see what's going on down there. I'm sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
I will tell you, it's pretty incredible. And when I say the best outcomes in the nation, we're not measuring that ourselves, okay?
Right.
If anybody says they've got the best outcomes, I'd say, show me. Show me who's pulling the data on that. So it's a scientific firm that has the largest data set across the nation. Mm-hmm. And so we measure our outcomes in 9 different domains, and in every domain we are 20 to 30% higher. At the end of the day, that means that they're happy, they found their joy again, and that they are no longer using a substance if they came to us with an additional issue, meaning alcohol or drugs, and self-medicating that trauma.
Right.
We know the base issue is trauma. The 30-day models, they want to talk about substance abuse. That's a symptom.
Yeah.
And so we look at the trauma, and we find trauma resolution. and step people through. And I think that's what makes us so different. But me being a wife of a police officer who was then task force DEA agent for many years, I always wanted to work with first responders and the children and spouses of. I remember many years ago when my husband and I were struggling because he couldn't take the cop off at the door, reading that book Beyond the Badge.
Yeah.
And that book, I went, no wonder 86% of you guys get divorced. You're all fucked up, all of you guys are. So, but honestly, I was fucked up too. Sure. So I saw what happened to once a lot of guys became CID. Sorry, Erika, there were more guys than girls. But when I saw that, they'd all end up at a bar. And then they became alcoholics. And then we lost a very close officer to suicide. And so it really perpetuated me into trying to make a difference. So it's kind of, and we don't, like Erika said, the family component is really important, whether that's, it just has to, it's part of treatment. It's part of the journey.
Right. Well, it has to be. And David talks a lot about the 4 Fs. And I was going back and reviewing updating the podcast library. And we were talking about the 4 Fs early on with our show. And you talked about family, and that's, one of the 4 Fs, which is faith, family, friends, and favorite activities is what we talk about, the stuff that gets us through the shit. I was just talking with a colleague the other day, and he's in a very dark spot. Doing the whole isolation thing. And I asked him, I said, when was the last time you just openly belly laughed? And he couldn't remember. When was the last time you went to church? I don't go to church.
Yeah.
What do you do with your family? Nothing. It's like, bro. We need to get back to that. And Shannon, I'm glad you brought that up. And how we are, I guess my question is, the difference between Ohio and Texas is how are the officers down there receiving your program? What is and maybe Erika can chime in on this. How is the program being received? Because I can tell you right here in Ohio, and Mr. Hatt, you can jump in too. We talk about mental health here. I mean, it's the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it here in Ohio. Go ahead. Whoever wants.
Erika, how's it being received? It's the most amazing thing. I hear about it from them. But Erika, how is it being received?
It received very well. So one thing that I'm really glad to see, absolutely ecstatic actually to see, is that the culture is beginning to turn around a little bit. It's beginning to recognize the importance of mental health. You have officers now that are coming in for treatment that are returning to duty because they have a mental health professional that's able to assess them as stable and appropriate to do so. Very different from, my experiences many years ago where, you're struggling with trauma, you're struggling with addiction. How quickly can we get you out the door? And so I get to see the journey from beginning to end. I get to see that individual that I meet for the first time that is absolutely broken. They're struggling with grief, loss, mortal injury, identity loss, shame and guilt. Right. And I get to see that individual completely broken come into our program, and I get to see the light start to come back on in their eyes. I get to see their brain functioning starting to return. They start making better decisions for themselves. They're processing through the trauma and finding meaning in the difficult situations and the trauma that they've been involved in. And I get to see the vast majority of them, the ones that come in and do the work. I get to see them discharge our program happy, healthy, connected. And like I said, more and more, especially in the last couple of years, I'm seeing more and more clients that are coming in, not because their career is over, but because they want to get well and be able to return to that. So, gotcha. The other side of that, of course, is I have 2 boards in my office that are up on the wall. One board holds the patches from various military units, and the other board is specific to first responders. And so in the last couple of years, one of the most amazing things that's happened, and it's happened with 3 other clients that I've worked with, is they actually gave badge to me to put on to that board. That's huge.
That's
that means
awesome.
that they identified who they really are outside of, hey, this is my friend, she's a cop.
Right.
Yeah.
That they're able to embrace themselves as whole human beings and realize that they don't have to carry that badge and that gun to live a happy and fulfilling life. And that's a beautiful thing when that happens. So I get to see it beginning to end.
It lights you
I
up
think
too.
in Texas is turning around, and it's recognizing not just the importance of getting their officers into treatment when they're struggling. They're actually making inroads now with mental health programs, mental health officers that are specific to staff. So when they see someone beginning to struggle, they're able to provide and support them in the provision of resources.
That's awesome. That's big steps in the right direction. That's really good to hear. I get the sense from all of us and many of the guests that we've had, and your story as well, that alcohol becomes a major part of this whole thing. That, the sentence that you said in this podcast that really stuck with me was, I think it was your husband had asked you, why do you keep drinking or something like that? And your statement was, I want to feel human again. And I just, to me, that was very powerful. And I know that at this point you're sober, and you have been for a number of years. You're an active member of AA. Yes. So like the alcohol thing, like how critical is it to recovery?
I didn't hear that. How critical is it
to recovery?
Absolutely. Your life depends on it. Mine did. This wasn't just about the dysfunction that it had created in the family or the dysfunction that it had created in my career. I absolutely stopped functioning as a human being. I became disconnected from life. I took my first drink at 11 years old. And I don't think I responded to alcohol. I know I didn't. I didn't respond in a normal way. It was an immediate love affair. And so by the time I got into law enforcement, that's part of what I loved about the culture was this idea of work hard, play hard, and choir practice. And after my shooting, that is the one thing that the came together. I had several officers get together and say, we're going to get you drunk tonight. That was my therapy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But, towards the end of all of this, for me, after I left law enforcement, I ended up homeless. So I lost my home. I've lost my husband. I've lost my children at this point. I've lost my self-respect. I have no idea who in the hell I am. I know I'm not that broken kid anymore.
Right.
But I'm also not Erika the police officer anymore. So I really had to figure out who in the hell I was. And the only way that was going to happen was if I got the help that I needed to get sober. So I had to put my ego down, my preconceived notions. It still cracks me up, but I used to refer to what I do now as, shrinks, and now I am one. So that's, I hated shrinks back in the day. They were just nosy people that were trying to, prevent me from doing what I wanted to do. So, and they were going to dime me out and tell everything to the chief anyway. So I didn't trust them. Yeah. But I was absolutely, 3 trips to a psych ward, three times being hospitalized for acute alcohol poisoning. I was dying.
Wow.
I was homicidal. I was suicidal. And I was dying a slow death. And that it was beginning to speed up. Things were getting much, much worse. So when I finally got the help that I needed, I put my last drink down on March the 10th of 2013. I ended up in a homeless women's shelter for 6 months. Where I was finally taught AA, and some other people in recovery finally helped me to understand that if I didn't quit drinking and if I didn't start using the tools that I needed in order to do that I would die from this.
Yes.
And I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop.
Right. Exactly. And the alcohol turned the pain down. True?
Oh, not now. Now that it's interesting because when I say that there's a nugget of truth to that. It did numb me out, but I can also tell you this: the only times that I ever used to pull out my old pictures and badges and uniform and pictures of my kids when they were little, the only time that I did that was when I was loaded. The only time that I broke down and lost it completely was when I was intoxicated.
Wow.
So there's a reason that 12-step programming refers to alcohol as cunning, baffling, and powerful. It promised me that it would numb those things out, and it worked for a little bit, but once it stopped working, it stopped working. By the time that happened, the obsession had already taken over.
Okay.
There was no, I'm not going to drink today. I was addicted.
You were dependent on it.
You know, Erika's one of the ones that, I guess she burned it all down, right? Burned it from being way up here all the way to the ground.
Wow.
There's another group that I know suffers in silence, and I see it all the time because I'm still very much in contact, even though my husband's retired, to a lot of the wives of officers, and the amount of divorces that I see and broken homes as a result of not dealing with their mental health. And some of those do self-medicate. And I'm going to tell you what I see are the patterns of that happening generationally. So dad comes home, rough day on patrol, goes to the fridge, drinks beer, not really engaged with the kids. Now we've gotten late into the evening, so there's really no presence there.
Yeah.
And that generationally will sneak down into the next generation because that's how they're learning their coping skills, right? So so dad or mom drink when they're sad, they drink when they're happy. So I'm now going to do the same thing. So now we're seeing these intergenerational patterns happen, and it wasn't one like Erika who's out there burning it down. It's the other quiet group that we have to pay attention to. I mean, Erika's way out here going, I need help, I need help, I need help. But there's a whole group that is not saying that, that really do need help because they've dealt with so much trauma.
Yes.
And they don't know what else to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost
oftentimes they feel guilty. Don't want to talk about what they're struggling with because they know that their family member is struggling and they don't want to add more fuel to the fire. No, this is about him. This is his struggle. How in the world my husband is in tears right now or my wife is in tears. How am I supposed to tell them that I'm struggling too? So it's very much just like addiction. It can be a very silent and deadly killer.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
And as you're both saying, it becomes tragic because it then extends into generation after generation. And it becomes, you look for a mate that will accept, tolerate, and join you in your drinking. And then you have children that from that marriage that watch the parents drink. And it just becomes like, that's exactly right, Shannon. This is the way we live. This is the way we solve problems. This is the way we cope with stressors. Yes, it becomes the solution more than people hide in seeing the solution, not the problem that it's creating in the rest of their lives. Absolutely. Wow. Okay, I want to change gear a little bit because you're both therapists. Oh, we got to be watching the time here. Okay.
David's on a roll. What I want to do
man.
here real quick is just take a quick break.
Okay.
You guys good with that?
Fine. At some point, I'm probably going to take my phone on a charger, but other than that, yeah, we're good.
Only just be for a second. Let's just go ahead and recharge here real quick, and we'll get into the second half of this. So, we'll say the honors.
Cue the music, Donnie.
May your days and nights find you strong and safe. May you take your place as your family's face. As you do the shit that we won't do. As you embrace the risk you must go through. May you grow in strength and heal and find your heart, your soul, and your mind. You look at your life and grin. You have a home, the shield within.